Today, we will delve into one of the most shocking and tragic cases that sends shivers down the spine of even the most resilient individuals. Let's immerse ourselves in this chilling story. When an entire family falls under suspicion for committing a brutal murder, unraveling the intricacies and identifying the true culprit proves to be an incredibly daunting task. At times, the outcome of the investigation can be utterly unpredictable, astonishing even the most seasoned detectives. Sarah Raras entered this world on June 20, 1963. The girl shared a warm bond with her younger sister and dreamt of pursuing a career as an Air Force officer. Due to her father's profession, the family frequently relocated during Sarah's early childhood years. At the tender age of 6, the girl and her family moved once again, this time to the state of New Mexico in the United States, where Sarah began her schooling. IQ tests revealed that the girl possessed extraordinary intellectual abilities, particularly in the realm of mathematics and the hard sciences. Despite the large glasses that adorned the face of our story's heroine, she was a remarkably charming, cheerful, friendly, and sociable child. In 1980, Sarah graduated from high school and enrolled at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. The young woman brilliantly completed her education, earning a degree through her diligent efforts. Although she now lived separately from her loved ones, she continued to maintain a strong connection with them, especially with her sister Nancy. Sarah resided an hour's drive away from her parental home and would visit her family on weekends. During this period, the girl also met a young man named Paul Cohen. After obtaining her bachelor's degree, Sarah soon tied the knot with him. Following their marriage, the young woman decided to pursue a master's degree while simultaneously seeking employment. However, everything changed when Paul secured a position at a government agency in the District of Columbia. The couple relocated, prompting Sarah to abandon her studies, and now found herself 30 hours away from her childhood home. Eventually, the girl managed to secure a job as a statistician at the National Security Agency. Sarah's work involved deciphering codes, analyzing data, and handling classified information. She quickly established a reputation as an exceptionally conscientious and responsible employee. In her spare time, Sarah even started writing a book about murder investigations, as she had a deep fascination for detective stories. At work, the girl befriended a colleague named Laura Bitter. The young women engaged in extensive conversations, frequently spent time together, and enjoyed the company of their coworkers. During this period, Laura already had her own family and children. Observing her friend's happiness, Sarah also yearned to fulfill her dream of motherhood. However, after 3 years of married life, the relationship between Sarah and Paul began to gradually cool. Eventually, their marriage crumbled. In 1990, Sarah enrolled at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University, a renowned research institution, to further her education. The girl attended evening classes, enabling her to work full-time during the day. During her studies, Sarah met 25-year-old Lawrence Raras. The young man hailed from a close-knit Filipino family, worked at a local telecommunications company, and was known for his exceptional intelligence and sociability. Lawrence surrounded the girl with care and warmth, and a tender romantic relationship blossomed between them. On September 7, 1994, when Sarah turned 31 and obtained her master's degree, the couple tied the knot. The newlyweds purchased a small house in the quaint town of Elkridge, located in the state of Maryland. In July 1997, 33-year-old Sarah became pregnant. A boy, whom they named Will, entered the world. During this period, the girl's family once again relocated, finding themselves even further away from Sarah. Thus, Lawrence's relatives became the primary support system for the young mother. The couple relied on the assistance of Lawrence's mother, Emilia, in many matters related to the child. The woman worked at a nursing home and would often take her grandson with her to work. It seemed that Sarah had managed to establish a wonderful relationship with her new in-laws. However, the girl soon began to notice that Lawrence wasn't overly concerned about their firstborn or herself. The man started to become jealous of his wife's attention towards their son, believing that Sarah should be dedicating more time to him. Gradually, he came to the conclusion that the girl had simply used him to have a child. A rift emerged between the couple, and they began to drift apart. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that during this very period, Lawrence stopped taking the prescribed by his psychiatrist. Against the backdrop of all these changes in their relationship, the man began to exhibit increasingly and cruel behavior towards his wife. The woman sought help and advice from her mother-in-law, but the latter refused to intervene in her son's relationship, siding with him instead. The situation reached an impasse. In June 1998, Sarah handed Lawrence the divorce papers. The man gathered his belongings and moved out of the house a few days later. Finding herself alone with the child, the young mother immersed herself in work. Sarah devoted all her free time to her son, and when she was at work, a nanny looked after the boy. Sometimes, the woman would drop off the little one at her ex-husband's and his mother's place. Many friends and acquaintances admired Sarah, holding her up as an example of a loving mother and a determined woman who managed to juggle all these challenging responsibilities. To distract herself a bit, Sarah took up horseback riding, postponing the writing of her detective novel indefinitely, although she already had 3 completed chapters at that point. The divorce proceedings dragged on due to constant disagreements and disputes between the parties. A hearing was scheduled for December 3, 1998, to make a final determination on which parent would be granted custody of the child. The ex-husband waged a veritable war for the right to raise his son. Unfortunately, the young woman would not live to see the resolution of this painful issue. On Friday, November 13, 1998, 35-year-old Sarah dropped off the boy at his father's for the weekend. She spent Saturday with her friend Laura, indulging in some shopping. The two agreed to call each other on Sunday morning. But at the appointed time, Sarah did not answer. Laura tried calling her friend's home number several times. Only later did she notice that at 8:46 p.m. the previous day, the woman had left a message on the answering machine, which Laura didn't immediately hear. The friend hoped to learn that Sarah simply wanted to reschedule their meeting or had to urgently leave town. However, instead of the expected words about rescheduling or an urgent trip, the speaker emitted 40 seconds of pure horror. As soon as the recording started, several loud blows were heard. Then a woman's voice screamed something indiscernible, followed by a thud, as if the phone had been dropped on the floor. Next came the sounds of a struggle, after which eerie wheezing and coughing could be heard. In a panic, Laura dialed her friend's number, but no one answered on the other end. The line was busy. For several hours in a row, the woman tried again and again to reach Sarah, but to no avail. As dusk enveloped the city, Laura, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, headed to the police station. She recounted to the investigators the terrifying sounds she had heard during the call, expressing grave concern that something horrific might have happened to Sarah. The woman insisted on an urgent welfare check at her friend's house. When the cops arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed a shattered window through which someone had likely gained entry into the home where Sarah lived with her son. The law enforcement officers entered through the front door, and at that very moment, the alarm went off, which caused surprise, as the broken window should have triggered it as well. Upon entering the living room, the officers encountered a chilling sight. On the floor, in an unnatural position, amidst a huge pool of blood, lay the mutilated body of 35-year-old Sarah Raras, devoid of any signs of life. The room looked like the aftermath of a bloody massacre. Splatters and smears on the walls attested to the killer's inhuman cruelty. The child was nowhere to be found. Judging by the wounds on the victim's body, the attacker had used a cold weapon. Sarah was literally torn apart, stab wounds and cuts, dozens of scratches and abrasions. The majority of the injuries were concentrated in the areas of the abdomen, chest, and neck. The murderer had raged with particular ferocity, dealing blows to these parts of the body. The poor woman's head was barely attached to her neck, the treacherous knife having sliced through the soft tissues almost to the spine. The wrists were also horribly mutilated, nearly severed from the arms. The savagery of the killing was so shocking that some of the experienced detectives even suggested it might have been a ritualistic murder. A theory emerged that the attacker had intended to decapitate the victim but was somehow thwarted. Laura only notified the police in the evening, so, considering the time of Sarah's last call and the condition of the body and the blood surrounding it, experts concluded that death had occurred approximately a day prior. Evidently, after the murder, the perpetrator had rummaged through the house, as several items were missing. However, most valuables remained untouched, leading the cops to suspect a staged robbery. Forensic specialists discovered bloody shoe prints leading from the body to the shattered window. It appeared that the attacker had entered the house and left the crime scene through that very opening. The location of the house proved extremely convenient for escape. A dense forest began right behind it, providing ample opportunity to disappear. The police had little doubt that the killer was acquainted with the victim. This was confirmed by the fact that the perpetrator had managed to bypass the alarm system. He was well aware of the layout of the rooms and knew where the system would not be triggered. The level of brutality also indicated personal motives, blind rage, and hatred. The size of the footprints suggested that the attacker was a male. Everywhere, imprints of bloodied hands were visible, but not a single fingerprint suitable for identification could be found. The killer had obviously worn gloves. In addition to the victim's body, the specialists thoroughly examined the house and the surrounding area, hoping to come across traces of the attacker's blood. In the inner courtyard, they discovered a bloodied machete with traces of blood on both the blade and the handle. The weapon was immediately sent for analysis. That same evening, Laura arrived at Sarah's house. Upon seeing the yellow tape cordoning off the crime scene, the woman nearly fainted from horror. And when she learned the gruesome details of her friend's death, an icy despair gripped her heart. Laura was most concerned about the fate of Sarah's young son. The police could not yet provide any information about his whereabouts. It later transpired that he had been staying with his father at the time. Law enforcement officers tirelessly interviewed neighbors and anyone who might have witnessed the tragedy or noticed anything suspicious. But apart from the machete, which was promptly sent for examination, nothing else of value to the investigation was found or learned. News of the horrific murder spread like wildfire throughout the district. By the following day, Sarah's colleagues at the NSA were aware of the details of the tragedy. The victim's family, who at that time lived 1,000 kilometers away in Alabama, were also informed about the terrible event. The deceased sister, Nancy, took the news the hardest. Meanwhile, experts listened to the telephone message and confirmed that the recording indeed contained the sounds of a brutal attack. Investigators surmised that the assault had occurred slightly earlier than initially thought. Perhaps when the killer smashed the window, Sarah rushed to the phone to call for help but accidentally pressed 9 instead of 8 in her fright. It seemed that her friend was on speed dial under that very digit, which is why Laura received the chilling final message. Laura proved to be the most valuable witness in this tangled case. The woman was a close friend of the deceased and was able to describe in detail the circumstances of Sarah's life in the months leading up to her death. Laura's greatest suspicions fell on Sarah's ex-husband, Lawrence. He was fiercely jealous of Sarah's attention towards their son, and moreover, some time before the tragedy, he had stopped taking the antidepressants prescribed by his psychiatrist, causing his mental state to noticeably deteriorate. According to Laura, Lawrence owned 2 revolvers and 2 rifles, one of which was semi-automatic. This information seriously alarmed the police. The friend recalled that despite everything, Sarah had tried until the very end to maintain at least some semblance of a relationship with her ex and had even persuaded him to get rid of the weapons. But eventually, the couple did divorce. After that, Lawrence began to behave in a completely irrational manner, and Sarah was even forced to go to court to obtain a restraining order. A vivid illustration of the suspect's behavior was an incident on June 27, which Laura recounted to the investigators. On that day, Sarah handed Lawrence the divorce papers. In response, he beat her, grabbed the child, and fled the house, threatening that his wife would never see them again. The frightened woman did not dare pursue the madman, fearing for her son's life. In the evening, Lawrence unexpectedly returned and declared that if Sarah did not want to lose the boy forever, the couple must be that night. Cynically using the child as a means of coercion, Lawrence barged into the house and refused to leave. On June 28, he continued to threaten and blackmail his ex-wife. As soon as Sarah found a moment when Lawrence was not around, she immediately called the police. But when law enforcement arrived, the suspect denied everything, claiming it was his house, his wife, his child, and nothing illegal was happening. The man's behavior seemed completely irrational, which even the law enforcement officers noted. Eventually, they were forced to take Sarah and the child and drive them to a safe location in a patrol car. The following day, June 29, the woman filed a court petition seeking a restraining order against Lawrence. Thus began a fierce battle for custody of the boy and the financial obligations of the parties. Ultimately, the man left the family nest, and our story's heroine returned to her home with her 1-year-old son. Lawrence's lawyer insisted on Sarah's guilt, accusing her of emotional abuse and regular infidelity. After lengthy disputes, the parties finally agreed on a temporary visitation schedule. The father had the right to spend 2 days a week with the child. At other times, the boy remained with his mother. Lawrence turned these meetings into a real ordeal, attempting to humiliate his ex-wife at every opportunity. Simultaneously, threats and intimidation continued. In particular, the man repeatedly mentioned the possibility of taking the son out of the country, to the Philippines, for example. Even his lawyer acknowledged the absurdity of such statements. Despite this, Lawrence tried to obtain a passport for the child, but to no avail. Undoubtedly, such irrational behavior gave the police every reason to consider him the prime suspect in the brutal murder. Lawrence found himself at the center of the investigation, but direct evidence of his guilt was lacking. Sarah's neighbors' houses were located at a considerable distance, so no one heard anything suspicious and could not provide testimony. Despite the presence of a security alarm system, no video cameras were installed on the property, eliminating the possibility of checking footage from the crime scene. Detectives managed to discover that shortly before her death, on November 13, Sarah had once again called her friend Laura. The divorce proceedings were already coming to an end, and Lawrence had failed to secure any special privileges. The woman genuinely feared retaliation from her ex-husband over his loss in court. She asked Laura to take care of her son if something truly did happen to her. Sarah also confided to her friend that she kept a weapon under the bed. That's how much fear had haunted her in the final months of her life. At the time of Sarah's death, only 3 weeks remained until the court's final decision. And now it turned out that her little one was alive and well but under the care of the Raras family. Although this directly contradicted the mother's wishes, as she had categorically objected to her ex-husband and his relatives raising the child in the event of her death. 3 days passed after the tragedy before the police visited the Raras family's residence. Due to the lack of evidence, they could not formally charge Lawrence with anything, so they simply informed him of Sarah's death and closely observed the man's reaction. As soon as he crossed the threshold and heard the news, he immediately fell to his knees and burst into loud sobs. However, one of the officers noticed an interesting detail: when Lawrence got up, his face was completely dry. Not a single tear. It seemed he was merely putting on an act to throw the police off the scent. The man was taken to the station for questioning. He remained calm but with a hint of superiority, generally giving the impression of a level-headed person. From the very beginning, Lawrence categorically denied any involvement in the murder. The suspect recounted his version of events to the investigators. He claimed that on Friday, he had picked up the child and spent the entire day Saturday with him. And in the evening, around the time the murder occurred, he was peacefully at home with his family. Of course, these claims were corroborated only by his relatives who, given the strained relationship with Sarah, could not be considered an unbiased source. Thus, the alibi seemed highly dubious. Lawrence himself suggested that the killer could have been Sarah's former boss, Don Lewis, with whom the woman allegedly had an affair. In his opinion, the high-ranking NSA employee had simply decided to eliminate the only witness who could expose their secret relationship. But the level of brutality with which the victim was killed spoke of deeply personal motives, blind rage, and hatred. So, the detectives continued to view Lawrence as the prime suspect. However, at that point, there was not enough substantial evidence against him, so the man was released after questioning. Investigators obtained warrants to collect DNA samples and permission to search the Raras family's home. Unfortunately, in those days, forensic analysis took an extremely long time, so the investigation stretched on for months. Meanwhile, the analysis of blood samples collected at the crime scene continued. Detectives thoroughly questioned all members of the Raras family, and they immediately began to get tangled up in their testimonies. Some claimed that Lawrence was at home in the evening, while others insisted that he was still at work until 10 o'clock. Searches of the vehicles used by the suspect's relatives also yielded nothing. No traces of the murder weapon or footwear with prints similar to those found in the victim's house were discovered. The investigators decided to speak with Lawrence again, but he had already hired a lawyer and refused to cooperate. The fact that the suspect had a brilliant intellect with an IQ of 200 points significantly complicated the work of the police. Fortunately, the deceased's colleagues from the NSA came to the aid of law enforcement. They launched their own investigation, involving the best specialists and state-of-the-art technology. At this stage, most of the examinations and checks had been completed. The medical examiner identified the cause of Sarah's death as a deep wound to the neck, which led to the loss of 80% of her blood. Many other injuries also proved to be quite serious. In particular, the woman lost a lot of blood from cuts on her wrists. The lungs and liver were punctured, and a blow to the head caused severe craniocerebral trauma, although it was simply not noticed at first. But the most horrific wound was to the neck. The blade had sliced through it almost entirely. Meanwhile, NSA agents carefully studied the recording from Sarah's answering machine. They thought they heard the woman whisper the name of her killer before her death, Mike. That was the name of Lawrence's brother. The investigators decided to question him, but he behaved very nervously and did not provide any concrete information. Suddenly, the suspect's ex-wife, named Becky, contacted the police herself. The woman agreed to meet with the detectives to share important information. Becky contacted her ex-husband by phone and spoke with him at length, trying to elicit some critical information through leading questions. But all her attempts proved futile. Soon, the NSA-initiated investigation also came to an end. The agents concluded that the brutal attack on the young mother was in no way connected to the activities of the National Security Agency, and the case had a purely personal basis. A month after these events, the results of the DNA analysis from the traces found on the machete finally arrived. The examination confirmed the presence of Sarah's blood and the biological material of an unknown male, presumably the killer. However, to the great surprise of law enforcement, the genetic profile of the mysterious criminal did not match any of the samples collected from the persons involved in the case. The DNA did not belong to any male member of the Raras family or even Sarah's former boss, Don. Long months of oppressive silence ensued, with no lead offering even the slightest hope. The investigators even turned to the FBI for assistance, but this too brought no new developments. Although the agents did manage to debunk the theory that Sarah had allegedly whispered the name of her killer before her death. In reality, these chilling sounds turned out to be nothing more than death rattles. But on June 1, 1999, the long-awaited breakthrough in this convoluted case finally occurred. A detective from the Baltimore County Police Department called the police station and reported an incredible confession. In one of the prisons, an 18-year-old inmate named Ardale Tickles, convicted of attempted murder of his former boss at McDonald's, had told his cellmate about his involvement in the killing of a woman. From his words, the details of the crime closely resembled the attack on Sarah. The cellmate agreed to find out more, hoping for a reduction in his own sentence. Using a hidden microphone, he recorded Ardale's chilling confession about the events of November 13. It was shocking to discover that the murderer did not even know the name of his victim. He recounted how he had broken into the house through a window, armed with a machete, and tortured the defenseless woman for a long time. After finishing the bloody execution, the monster stood on Sarah's head with both feet and tried with all his might to crush it, but to no avail. Ardale confessed that he had been incited to commit this horrible crime by a former colleague, who had promised a reward of $5,000. Despite some skepticism about the veracity of this story, the police could not ignore one fact: the prisoner knew details of the attack that had never been made public. It seemed he was indeed involved in this horrific killing. Having received the unexpected confession, the investigators decided to personally speak with Ardale to hear the whole story firsthand and track down the person who ordered the murder. According to the young man, a woman had approached him, calling Sarah a bad person. Ardale himself was African American, and the stranger convinced him that the victim had made remarks and even provoked a miscarriage in the killer's close friend. So, he allegedly came to hate Sarah and readily agreed to brutally take her life after hearing a couple of stories. The hitman claimed that he had no idea about the client's personal motives and that she had masterfully manipulated his mind. For his dirty work, he received only $3,000 instead of the promised $5,000. However, the young man did not attach much importance to this, because he considered the murder of this woman almost a matter of honor. When Ardale was shown photos of all the men who were considered the main suspects in the case, he did not recognize any of them. It was also strange that the murderer did not even inquire about the name of his client and so willingly agreed to this venture. Ardale had a difficult childhood. His mother suffered from schizophrenia, and he himself had spent a long time in a boarding school, where he was once seriously injured in a fight with his peers. These events left an imprint on his entire future life. Despite the absence of a criminal record, the young man always displayed extreme aggression and susceptibility to outside influence. Unexpectedly, the young man recognized Emilia, Lawrence's mother, as his mysterious employer from a photograph. When he was told the general outline of the relationship between the two families, Ardale was stunned to realize how cruelly he had been deceived. After all, Sarah had never been a in her life but had simply become a victim of hostility from her ex-husband's relatives. Unfortunately, the young man's confessions alone were not enough to bring a well-founded charge. The investigators found out that Ardale and Emilia had indeed worked together at a nursing home. The match between the DNA from the traces on the machete handle confirmed the young man's involvement in the murder. And Emilia's guilt was proven thanks to the bank transactions she had made to pay the hitman for his work. Thus, she was officially charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Lawrence's sister told the detectives about the difficult relationship between Emilia and Sarah. The woman openly suffered from an unhealthy overprotectiveness of her son and reacted very painfully to her daughter-in-law's unwillingness to obey her. Against the backdrop of the deteriorating relationship between Sarah and Lawrence, the mother-in-law simply became consumed with rage towards her grandson's mother. Emilia cunningly twisted her own grievances to turn Ardale against a completely innocent victim. During questioning, Emilia admitted that she had conflicts with Sarah. The girl's behavior was perceived by the mother-in-law as a personal insult. Cultural differences played a significant role here, as Emilia was originally from the Philippines, where it is customary to unquestioningly obey mothers. The woman insisted that Sarah's disobedience and disrespect towards her were equivalent to murder, and therefore she considered the ordered attack on the young mother to be entirely justified and did not even feel remorse for it. The court hearings in this high-profile case took place in January 2000. Interestingly, there was not a single representative of the Raras family in the courtroom, except for the defendant herself. None of the relatives came to support Emilia during this difficult time. The prosecution insisted that the motive for the brutal attack was the woman's fear of losing custody of her grandson. For this, she unhesitatingly incited her dim-witted 18-year-old colleague to commit murder. The prosecutors even read out an excerpt from the interrogation where Emilia expressed indignation about the $2,000 she had not received, as the hitman had failed to smash Sarah's head as planned. The jury found Emilia guilty of first-degree murder and incitement to commit it. However, the fact of conspiracy could not be proven. Now the woman somewhat changed her testimony. She claimed that she had not wanted Sarah's death at all but had simply wanted to frighten her and force her to relinquish custody of her son. Emilia asserted that she had only shown Ardale the victim's house and asked him to throw stones at it. Of course, the investigators did not put much faith in such an outright lie. After all, as it turned out, the hitman knew the internal layout of the rooms perfectly and managed to enter the dwelling in such a way as to avoid triggering the alarm system. This clearly indicated that Emilia had disclosed all these details to the young man. So, her goal was definitely not mere intimidation. And who would throw away $3,000 just to have someone throw stones at a house? The sentencing took place on April 18, 2000. Emilia was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The woman sobbed in the courtroom, insisting that she deeply regretted her actions and had never wanted such a tragic outcome. Of course, no one believed her. The defendant maintained to the end that her son Lawrence was not involved in the conspiracy and knew nothing of her insidious plan. The prison guards closely monitored all of Emilia's telephone conversations, but they never found any evidence of Lawrence's guilt. However, Sarah's loved ones still believed that it was he who had incited his mother to commit this terrible murder. The trial of Ardale himself was scheduled to take place in March of the same year. But the young man decided to make a deal with the prosecution and fully admit his guilt. He claimed that he sincerely repented and prayed daily for Sarah's soul and the peace of her family. So, there was no full trial, and Ardale was immediately sentenced to life in prison. However, thanks to his heartfelt confession, he was granted the right to parole. In 2009, Emilia filed an appeal, pleading for a review of the sentence. The woman claimed that she had changed a great deal behind bars, becoming more gentle and deeply religious. But all her arguments proved futile. The court rejected the petition. Lawrence passed away on February 8, 2023, on his mother's birthday. The man was only 57 years old. 88-year-old Emilia is still serving her sentence in a correctional facility. As for Ardale, in 2024, he became eligible to petition for parole. He immediately took advantage of this opportunity. The convict insists that he has sincerely repented and strives to start a new life. But the decision has not yet been made. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.